Hi, guys. Welcome to A Little Help for Our Friends, a podcast for people with loved ones struggling with mental health. Hey, little helpers. Today, we're going to talk about why families are so divided these days. And I have a really special guest for you today. Her name is Dr. Amy Todey. And I met her through Instagram and my therapist network, and she is amazing. She is a psychologist. She lives in Atlanta, but I think she has a clinic in Boston. And she is a specialist of family relationships and co-parenting. And I've been watching her content for a while, and I've been following her. And I love her approach to understanding and trying to connect families that are so fractured. So I've been hearing from a lot of you talk about, what do we do when you have an abusive parent and you need to cut them off? Or what do you do if you have a kid with borderline personality disorder? It's been so tough for people to navigate, like, how do I love someone in my family and yet they trigger me? Or it's really complicated, or there's a bad history there. And I'm especially hearing that in between people in their early adulthood, like 20s and 30s, and even millennials, and the boomer generation. So I'm hearing stuff like, my 20-year-old daughter has borderline personality disorder and screams at me and tells me that I'm abusive and I don't know what to do about it. I'm also hearing people say, my mom, who's older, has really hurt me for many years, and she wants access to my kids, and I don't know what to do about that. So I'm just really seeing all these family divides and these generational divides. And I wanted to ask Dr. Todey about this and her perspective. And just before I dive into that, I want to say that if you're struggling with a family member, family divide, estrangement, or close to estrangement on the rocks, and you love that person so much and you want to learn how to show up for them better and show up better for yourself, check out Mind. That's my program for actually teaching all the skills that we talk about in this podcast. So KULAMIND.com. I really hope you enjoy this conversation with Dr. Todey, because she brings up a really good point that we have gotten to a place where we can't tolerate any discomfort, any problems in relationships. We go to, let's cut them off. Let's, estrange, they're out of my life. Sometimes that makes total sense, but sometimes that's really shortchanging us. It really cuts off someone really important, and it doesn't help us learn how to deal with really difficult relationships in our lives. So we might be doing ourselves a disservice when we just go straight to that mom or child or sibling is toxic and we got to cut them off. So this was a really fascinating conversation. We get really personal about our own family struggles or times when we felt like, that we were not our best self. And Dr. Todey gives a lot of insight and scripts into what can we do about it? What can we say that honors the relationship as well as healthy boundaries for ourselves? And if you want to learn more about working with Dr. Todey or just following her content about family relationships and grandparenting and ethical therapy, co-parenting, and things like that, her Instagram is Dr. Todey. Let me actually make sure that I spell it right. DRAMYTODEY. Or her website is toddeypsychology.com. And I can link all of those in the show notes for you so you can find her easily and just talk to her directly. Hope you enjoy this conversation. Welcome back, little helpers. I'm so excited today to talk to Dr. Amy Todey. Is that right? Amy Todey?
Right. Amy Todey, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So excited, mostly because, follow you on Instagram. We're connected through our friend Chandler, and I love seeing psychologists talk about these family dynamics. So I wanted to ask you and dive into, like, what is going on with families? This families in general are having a rough time, and maybe this is just our biased view of seeing families that are having a rough time, but there seems to be a really big disconnect between the different generations. So that's what I can't wait to talk to you about that. But first, tell me who you are. Tell us who you are and how'd you get to do all this stuff?
Yeah, so my name is Dr. Amy Todey, and I am a psychologist. I have a private practice based in Atlanta and Boston. I spend most of my year in Atlanta, and then I come to Massachusetts in the summer to practice and have a practice there. I've spent my career working with families across the lifespan. So I've done a lot in pediatrics. I used to be at Boston Children's Hospital in development, actually, but I've done a lot of high conflict divorce work. But the family, and I don't mean family in any idealized version of family, but just the messy, everyday, real imperfect family, that is really the heart and soul of I what I do. And so I've been working a lot with parents and just navigating high conflicts. I work a lot as well with intergenerational relationships, so adult children and their parents. And that is where I've seen a lot of the conflict that you're talking about arise, is just these generational differences in how we're raising kids and values differences. The world has changed so much with the technological age as well. And so generations of well-meaning people are they're missing each other, right? And so I have spent a lot of my Instagram is really dedicated to how do we start to understand each other across generations? How do we preserve the family? How do we understand that belonging is really the heart and soul of what makes people human? And importantly, how do we structure repair? Because all families are going to be imperfect. All families are going to have times when they don't see eye to eye. Maybe somebody hurts someone else, or someone feels invalidated, or someone, I mean, I know grandparents a lot, they end up feeling lonely or pushed out, and adult children feel not respected or not heard because they're trying to do things a little bit differently. And those differences, generational differences, lead to conflicts that lead to sometimes people becoming estranged for not just days, weeks, months, but years, right? Because of the divide that happens. And so how do we come back to each other and recover from those moments, those
Mm, yeah. Where are you seeing the most unhappiness, the most disconnect? I mean, I'm seeing it a lot in like adult kids who are like 20s and 30s, and they're, I think, boomer parents at this point. Like, but you're also talking about grandparent relationships. So where do you see the most like tension?
To your point, I think it is happening between boomer parents and adult children. I think it's happening between Gen Jones, which those are sort of young, a little bit younger than the boomers, right? And they're
When
adult.
what?
Gen Jones, I know, I didn't even know this was a thing, but one of my Instagram followers, or some of the Instagram followers have been talking about like, hey, I'm Gen Jones, so I had to chat GPT it.
Wait, what is
I
that?
know. So, I mean, they're a little bit younger than the boomers, right? But
Isn't
those are
that
the people,
Generation
because
X? I feel
Gen
like
X
there was an
would be,
X.
so I'm gonna have to like look it up to tell
No.
you exactly. Because I'm actually not a generations expert, but I've talked about it because I do think it's what I think, no matter what we call the generations, I think people aren't alone in experiencing these things. It's definitely a cultural shift. There's a trend around it. So much of the responsiveness and the traction I've gotten from Instagram is like, oh my gosh, I thought I was the only one. I feel seen for the first time ever. And I think it's just because for whatever reason, where the modern family is, where our culture is today, is leading to these experiences of people feeling shut out, of people feeling unheard on the other side, and then families really fracturing and breaking apart. So to answer your question, I see it honestly across the lifespan. I work in high conflict divorce, so I see a lot of estranged children, I mean, under the age of 16, who don't have relationship with their parents and have been sort of empowered to say, listen, this person hurt me. I'm uncomfortable around them. I don't want a relationship with them. And then there's parents on the other side that are supporting those risks, which, we can talk a lot of nuance there. But, to your point, it's starting from childhood all the way up through the boomers, which are sort of the older generation of parents parenting adult children now. I'm seeing it. It's a definite trend.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. So sad. I mean, I'm hearing a lot of like boomer generation or like older generation saying these younger generations are so sensitive, right? The snowflakes. And then the younger generations are looking at the older generations and saying they are narcissists. Like I've had questions of people asking me like, why are so many parents narcissists? Do you see that too? Like, what's going on there? What's happening?
Definitely hear that and see that from people. And the thing about we could have a whole podcast on this, Kibby, right? The thing about using labels for people is that it immediately places all of the need for accountability on somebody else. And so people use those labels to create this psychological distance where they're like, my mom is a narcissist or my co-parent's a narcissist or whatever. So I just don't have to deal with them. And really what we know, and you and I already had a conversation about this, it's a very small percentage of people who actually meet criteria for that diagnosis. So I can see those kinds of personality traits, as I know you can, on a spectrum, right? Like we may all have a bit of internalized narcissism. It's probably why we take pictures of our kids and plaster it all over Instagram these days, right? But that doesn't mean that a person is a narcissist. And I generally, even if that is an appropriate term, as a psychologist, like I just don't see human beings that way, right? We're more than a label, we're more than a diagnosis, we're more than our worst moment. And so I think discounting a person, even if it's a mental health issue that you're dealing with, is a really good way for someone to say, I don't want to do the hard work of being in a relationship and making this repair because it's uncomfortable and it's hard. And yeah, someone might hurt you over and over again because guess what? We're human and that's what humans do. So I do see that. I also, there's just these differences in values, and without talking about the labels or the different generations, older generations, they often came from a world where love was shown through sacrifice, through providing, through staying, their presence, through enduring, keeping private matters private, not burdening other people with their feelings. Whereas younger generations are asking for love to include things like emotional attunement and accountability and repair and boundaries and mental health awareness. And all of those things are amazing, right? And I feel like we've overcorrected, like we also still, that there is value in boomer generations that said, you know what, I get that you're bored, but go outside and find something to do. Or if you come in, I'll put you to work. So if you don't want to work, go outside and play, right? Or just they could tolerate distress. Like my child doesn't want to go to school. Well, it's school and they're going, right? Today, what we see a lot with parents is that they're confusing their child's discomfort with danger or
Mhm.
responding to the discomfort, not with like, hey, you got to suck it up and cope with this, right? But they're going straight for the emotion, which is good, but without that counterbalance of saying, we need to figure out how to tolerate this because life is hard, you know? And so I think those values clashes are really where I see the most friction between generations.
Do you have an idea? I mean, I was talking to my mom about this, and we deal with the same kind of issues. I was talking to my mom about this conversation, and she was like, "Yeah, but every generation has a different parenting. Like, I felt this way with my parents. Do you think that that's true? Do you think that like every generation of parenting is just going to be different, and we're always going to be like, oh, my mom sucks, and I'm going to be different, and then it's just not the same? Or do you think that there's something going on about now?
I think there's something going on about now. I think older generations had those reflections of their parent. I think they had insight around it. I don't think they rejected their parents the way current generations do. And that rejection might be complete estrangement, or it might be sort of a rejection that is like not including parents and things, setting these really rigid boundaries. So when I say rejection, I know that most families aren't estranged, right? I mean, some families are, but most families aren't. I do think cutoff culture, though, is a thing. I think that the difference is before people would say, oh, my parents did it this way and I didn't like they did it this way, so I'm going to correct with my kids and we're going to do it a little bit differently. Whereas now we're kind of like, my parents did it this way. They abused me. They no longer are valid in my life as a human and have no value to me. And so bye-bye, and
Mhm.
that is where I really think we have to, as a culture and as a society, really think critically. Because, I'm scared. Like, I'm not a perfect person. Kibby, you're not a perfect person. We're raising kids right now. I mean, what am I doing to traumatize my children that someday they're going to say, you know what, mom, you just didn't hear me when I told you I was upset about this. And, now I've been traumatized. So I'm not trying to be callous either. I do want to acknowledge, like, some people have really been through abusive, horrible situations, right? And so I'm not trying to be flip about this in any way. But even in those situations, right, what we teach abuse victims is not that they're a victim their whole life, it's that they're a survivor. And there's a way that they can recover from the history and grow and develop coping skills, but also assertiveness and communication skills that help them move forward in relationships with the very people who have hurt them, right? And so no matter what you've been through, I'm not trying to erase pain or saying that doesn't matter. Of course it matters. Oh my gosh, we have to think about how people are treated. Growing up with a narcissistic mom or dad, that's like how you mentioned, that's really hard. There's nothing easy about that, right? The question is, can someone hurt you and can you still also love them at the same time? Can you have a relationship with someone and set boundaries with them, right?
Yeah, really, really good points. I'm gonna go from the adult kids perspective, and then I'll actually jump to the parents' perspective. Adult kids perspective, how do we know when it's okay to actually cut off? Like, let's say I'm thinking about, like, yeah, like every time talking to your mom or dad, they undermine you. They say things that hurt your feelings. They maybe in the past have used corporal punishment, like, and yet at the same time, knowing that, I want to have a relationship with that. I don't want to cut them off. Like, how do you know uh, when it's okay to cut off a parent or another family member?
This is where I do take a little bit more of a radical position, right? And I want to change what you're asking just a little bit, because I'm not saying what I'm saying from a place of judgment, right?
Mhm.
It's not about like whether something's okay or not okay. I mean, honestly, people they're going to live their lives the way they see fit. So it's not from a place of judgment, but it's more a question. At what cost, right? At what cost are you cutting these people off? Because when we reduce people to their worst moments and we say, these moments are so bad that we cannot see your human goodness anymore. You have no value or business in my life anymore, right? We're not seeing the nuance, right? We're not acknowledging humanity. We're basically saying things are very black and white. Once you cross this line, you're out of here, right? It's just not a position that I am inclined to have families take. And I can tell you a story about this, okay? To show you that, I mean, there's a lot of stories we can take through history too. Like, people sometimes come to me in high conflict divorce and they're like, our family is broken. It's way beyond repair. We can't do anything about this. This person's dead to me, blah, blah. And I'm like, y'all, we had the Holocaust in our world and we've moved on, right? Now, we don't move on and say that didn't happen. That pain doesn't matter. It's fine. It's okay. It's nothing like that, right? But we have largely moved culturally toward forgiveness, toward using that as a way to learn a lesson and grow. And it isn't perfect. Anti-Semitism still exists. There's still problems, right? But I mean, we didn't take Germany and say, we're done with you as a country, right? We didn't do that. And, just another more personal anecdote, my aunt and uncle were divorced a long time ago, and they had 3 kids together. And my aunt got remarried and she went out of town on her honeymoon, flew with her new husband. And while she was gone, there was a red flag warning, in the ocean off the California coast, and they weren't, no one was supposed to go on a boat. My uncle, her ex-husband, took their 3 children out on a boat into the ocean. The boat capsized, okay? And they swam for shore. Only 2 of the kids made it. One of the kids didn't. It's the most devastating tragedy that any parent could ever imagine, you know? But I tell this story to tell you, like, my aunt and uncle, that even though they're divorced and this horrible tragedy happened, they talk to each other. They co-parent. My aunt called me and was like, "Hey, I know this is a little unconventional. This is when I got married in 2013." She was like, "Can I bring my ex-husband to the wedding?" And I'm like, "Of course you can," right? So the reason I tell that story is to show that like forgiveness often resides within our own soul, right? And whether we choose to forgive someone has a lot more to do with what's going on inside of us than it has to do with what they did, right? Sometimes we have to grieve the person, the relationship with a person that we wanted it to be, how we wanted it to be. We have to grieve that in order to accept what is, accept that other people have limitations. They make terrible mistakes in life, terrible mistakes, right? We really have to ask ourselves a question. Does that mean that they get excommunicated? They no longer belong. They're no longer have a seat at our Thanksgiving table. And I just, in a career where I've spent my life working in high conflict divorce, intergenerational connection, I've seen some of the worst tragedies families have been through. I've not met that family. I've never met a family where I was like, you know what? Cutoff is the right choice. I don't see another path forward. I have too much hope in humanity to advocate for something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes so much sense. I'm still staying with the kids perspective, so I'm going to play devil's advocate. But I've also experienced this where even just any interaction with my mom at the time, now things are better, but which might be to your point, but there are some people who, when they interact with their mom or dad or sibling or whatever, it always makes them feel terrible. It always like there's a there's a criticism, and it crumbles their self-esteem, and they fight so hard to heal, and one word from their mom about their weight and it's just like I feel like shit about myself again, right? So what do you do when it's interesting when you were talking about those different examples, a lot of it is like, like a defined trauma, tragedy, right? What happens if there's a dynamic that just makes you go nuts every time you talk to your mom? Like, what do you do?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point because I did give you examples of things that had pretty discrete point in time when something happens. So the way that I'm going to respond to that question is by saying like, when I'm saying I'm not a person that advocates for cutting people off, it doesn't mean that I don't advocate for setting boundaries, right? So boundaries are important. I think people misunderstand them. I think they use them a lot to cut people off or to build walls between relationships. I really think boundaries, the purpose of boundaries is to protect and preserve the relationship, right? So it is important that we acknowledge how we feel and what we can handle in a certain situation. And if someone's behavior is hostile, abusive, inappropriate, just any of those things in that category, I think it is okay for us to say, I'm not willing to engage with you in this way, right? When you behave like this, it hurts me. I get defensive. I behave in ways that I'm not proud of. I'm not going to stay around right now if this is going to be the way that you engage with me, but we can always talk about this again when we're both calmer, right? That's a way to kind of say, listen, I'm not saying not now, not ever. I'm saying not now, right? We're not going to do this right now. And so in the examples you're giving, you're talking about people who are constantly critical, hostile, demeaning, right? When those behaviors occur, we have to respond to them. But what other people do isn't about you, right? So the way your mom treats you really doesn't have much to do with you. That has to do with your mom and what she's struggling with and her old wounds, maybe going back to her childhood. That's not saying you shouldn't be accountable if you do something to hurt her. That's not what I mean. But we always have a choice, right? You can demean me and insult me right now, and I could choose to take that in and get really hurt by it and map that on to like all these old wounds and insecurities. Or I can choose to take a deep breath and say, wow, what Kibby's saying to me really isn't about me. And I wonder what's going on for Kibby,
Mhm.
right? Where is she coming from? What pain? People, when they can do well, they do. People are good inside, right? So like when they can do well, they'll do it. Kids do that and adults do that. When people don't feel good about themselves or about, you know, what's happening, that's when we see behavior start to unravel and decompensate. And so I think the problem, right, is that boundaries are understood in a way to like control someone else's behavior and externalize something and say, you stop doing this. Well, the problem with that is we cannot control anybody else. We can only control ourselves. So a boundary is really about how do we step back when we need to step back while still maintaining emotional openness for other people being human, right? And that might not mean that you have intimate relationships with with every family member where you confide in them, because maybe that other person can't make a repair or create a safe enough place for you to be able to talk about the stuff that's really vulnerable or intimate, right? I have people in my family like that. I'm sure you do as well, right? But it also doesn't mean that we fully reject somebody, push them away, and get them out of our life, right? Because there's so much loss in that that has nothing to do with the conflict, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I love that concept of boundaries, and there is so much of like boundary means you don't do this or say this to me, otherwise I'm never going to speak to you again. I'm like, that's yeah, that is a boundary, but it is focusing on controlling the other person. When you were talking though, there this is actually something that I still struggle to understand what the bounds are. When people say abuse, when people say safe and unsafe, right? Like we're seeing this online and I'm going nuts with it, where it's like unsafe person. And it's just like anybody, right? It's just like anyone who's like defending themselves or something. But how, from the kid standpoint, how do we understand abuse? Actually, in between, like how do the parents and the kids understand abuse? Because let's say, for example, the
Are
way
you
the way
adult children, just so I know? You're talking about
well,
adult
I'm talking
children?
about adult children, but I'm also talking about adult children who are processing like childhood. Like, oh, my mom or dad has always made me feel XYZ, or they've been abusive to me, and therefore I don't want to talk to you or whatever. Um, I'm seeing actually a hard thing of like cutting off, but still asking for money and other kind of material support from parents. And that's tricky. That's a whole thing. But the definition of abuse and how abuse or trauma is understood, I wonder what you think is like how you understand abuse and trauma. Just because, for example, the weight thing is a funny example because my mom and all my Chinese family will comment on weight. For us, growing up in America, that's like really mean, right? That's like to say to your daughter, like, you look fat. Like, we would say that might be emotionally abusive, whereas other cultures would see that as like, I'm being a caring mom because like the intent is different. I'm being a caring mom, just pointing out their health, right? So what do you do when you have these older generations that will say like, suck it up, you're okay, you're gaining weight, or all these different things that they're just doing out of good intent, but it is really damaging for the kid's self-esteem, or it's hurt them over the years, and they go, I feel like that was abusive. How do you
Yeah, I mean, that's a really hard one. Abuse in children is easier to define because, in a way, it's legally defined, right? And there's a clear power differential. And what I tell families is like that is the line that I go by when I'm practicing, especially in high conflict divorce. But abuse often involves power control, intimidation, humiliation, coercion, things like that. Repeated boundary violations can be abusive behavior. So I think when I'm sitting with a client and this is their story, right? I am inclined to acknowledge their story as their truth and as the truth for them of what they experienced, right? If you listen to people when they're telling these stories, often a child will say exactly that, right? That I wasn't heard. My parents would gaslight me. My parents would call me names. They would yell at me when I needed them to be there. They weren't, right? And on the other side of that coin, a parent is saying, I was working three jobs to take care of you. I always had food on the table. I loved you the best way that I knew how. I made all these sacrifices for you, right? And that story also is an authentic truth, right? And so I think that people get to tell their own story, right? We actually don't get to tell our kids' story. We're writing it every single day, but we don't get to tell it. People get to tell their own story and they get to be the experts on their story. The question is, are they able to hold and honor their story at the same time that they also hold and honor that somebody else also has a story? And that empathy and the ability to take perspective, that is really what's lost, I think, in our culture today. I mean, I'd love to hear you talk because you referenced your mom a few times, right? It sounds like you have a pretty nuanced understanding of like maybe something your mom did that hurt you, but understanding it also through a cultural lens or understanding it through the lens of what she was trying to do with the way that she handled things, right? Is might be
I mean,
different.
it's so tricky because there have been times that are healing when I go, why is my inner dialogue so self like doubting, so critical. And then like even as a psychologist who's had like years of therapies, years of training, I'm still like, why am I like this? And then I hear my mom say, you're not doing that well enough. And I'm like,
Right.
like sometimes it's healing to externalize it and do the blame game and be like, wait, you are the one who made me this way. And then at the same time, I also know where she's coming from and I, see the humanity in her. The tricky part is when I do that, then I'm at danger of flipping to the other side of being like, okay, I feel so bad and I'll let her in and I'll suck it up when it hurts my feelings, right? So
You're like going from one end to the other, right? Like it's
yeah,
kind of like
yeah.
an either or. Either you're like, this is not okay, this was abusive,
Mhm,
whatever, or
mhm.
you flip to the other side where you're like, oh, I feel so bad for my mom, and right?
Right.
But what
Let
about
them
this?
in, suck it
What
up. Yeah.
about what about the middle? What about like I have my story and I had this teenager tell me this one time. She said, my parents put so much academic pressure on me, so much academic pressure. Like I'll have mental health issues for the rest of my life. I mean, I need therapy, I need medication, I need all of these things, right? And then in the same breath, she was like, but I'm so grateful that they did it because I went to an Ivy League school and I'm published before the age of 21 and like I can have any job I want,
Mhm.
right? I mean, those are two truths that came out of the same parents in that same child. And there's a maturity in being able to say, gosh, that hurt me. And it also motivated me,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
This story has pain in it and it's also beautiful. And my mom was trying and she loved me. And there are ways that she fell short and actually falls short every single day, right? So it's
Yep.
like a choice, in my opinion. I mean, I can talk to you about my own mother, but I'm afraid to do it because if I start, I might not stop, and that'll just be what this becomes, right? But
Please do.
there are generational differences. There's mental health issues. I mean, much in the same way you're saying, my mom has crossed boundaries with me and my kids that honestly are like inconceivable, like not okay, right? I choose to hold that and set boundaries on that and love her because
Mhm.
she's a human who deserves my love. She gave me life. She brought me into this world. Like there is no one actually in the world that will do things for me, including like my husband or my dad or my best friend. That my mom is the only person in the world that will do certain things for me. The only person in the world. She's also probably the person who's hurt me more than anyone else in the world. And those two things are true at the same time, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Holding the dialectic of like good and bad. Good. And can we hold the nuance of that? As you were saying that, when you're dealing with kids, and I know that you talked about grandparents, what do we do? What do grandparents, if from the adult kid side, what do our grandparents have a right to when it comes to our kids? Like, let's say they're crossing our boundaries, they're pissing us off, they're like, times that I felt like, that I'm not my best self when, and certain family members are around. Do they get a right to our kids, or does that mean the cutoff or boundaries are necessary? What does that look like?
Yeah, I don't. When it comes to children, okay, I don't think about things in terms of what adults have rights to. Because
Mhm.
honestly, when we're talking about children, we have to make the decision to do what's best for our children, right? And if the adults don't get their needs met, it's kind of like you have a baby and you come home from the hospital with a newborn and the baby won't stop crying. You're like, I have a right to sleep. Well, good luck with that, bro. Like, you are not going to be sleeping for 6 months, you know? So our needs and our self-care, I mean, goes out the window when it comes to kids, and that's forever, right? And so the place I'm coming from is not like grandparents, we feel so bad for them, they have a right to this and they're not getting it. It is painful for them, but that's not the why. The why is that there's a loss, right? If so many losses. If we cut grandparents off completely, we cut children off from their roots. And what we know about children is that children who are rooted, who they know they come from people and they know who their people are, their self-esteem and their resiliency and their ability to be successful and face the world goes way up, right? And I will also, I mean, I can illustrate this also with a little bit of anecdote. The other thing that I think we lose is teaching kids that when somebody is hard to deal with, we can just get them out of our life, because we can't just get them out of our life. That's not the way this works. Have you ever had a boss before? Have you ever had, I mean, your PhD, right? Like, do you have a supervisor that you didn't get along with? I mean, there are things, but I mean, there's a political structure in this country that many people react to right now. We cannot just get these people out of our life. We have to tolerate it, right? So there's a silver lining in having some conflict and distress when we're children, because it teaches us how to learn and grow. And when a parent can provide a little bit of buffer or a framework for a child and how to understand what's happening and what's going on, like really validate, like, hey, it wasn't right that grandma said that to you. Something that's really common in boomer generations, they might be like, oh, stop being stupid, right? That's a word that younger generations are like, like, we can't use those language with our kids. And I'm one of them, right? I don't use language like that with my kids, right? And I don't think it's my parents do. But also, like, I am able to provide a buffer and say, grandma thinks about things differently than we do, right? And grandma should never have said that to you. And at the same time, we're still going to respect grandma because she's grandma and she loves you. She would do anything for you, right? That's hard though. So you're trying to validate the emotion. So that's one of the silver lining things. I will tell you, right? Like, my grandmother, she came from this strict English background, okay? She would intentionally sit at the dinner table, and we were little kids, and as soon as we, like, I don't know, put her elbow on the table, talked when we weren't supposed to, she would go at us like crazy. I mean, she was mean, awful. One time my cousin, she was so mad at him, she took a broom out of the broom closet and literally chased him around the house like this. She was going to smack him over the head with the broom. Like, this is a story that happened, okay? But she also had the most amazing jewelry collection I've ever seen. I'm in her house right now. It's in the attic over there. All these dresser drawers, like a dresser of red costume jewelry, all the drawers completely full. She put them in these like egg cartons, and they were like all organized, red, green, yellow, blue, gold, like multicolored, like they're still in there, right? Her love of fashion and like celebrating and beauty and like all of that is internalized within me. Like, that is part of who I am, right? So if my mom had said, listen, you chased whatever around the house with the broom and that's completely unacceptable, we can all agree that's completely unacceptable, you're out of here, then I miss out on all of the other stuff that I learned from her and stuff that she gave me, and
Mhm.
on of like, we can tolerate difficult people. We can there's a line, there's a boundary where we say, okay, that's enough. We have to know what that line is when we're going to take a step back. But also, like, someone can say something kind of gruff and mean, and we can kind of be like, they must be having a bad day.
Mhm. I think these are clearer, and maybe not, because that goes into like more physical violence, kind of corporal punishment. Where is the line where someone should say, you really shouldn't have access to my kids? Like the first thing that came up in my mind was like sexual abuse, right? Because that seems like like if someone had a history of being sexually abused by their father, their mother, access to the kids, regardless of what they get, I would really have a hard time with that. But what do you think is like,
No,
is there?
so obviously there are lines that cannot be crossed, right? We do have to protect our children from serious harm, right? I'm actually not a fan of protecting kids from all harm. You can probably tell that by talking to me. I do
Mhm.
actually think it's important for kids to get into a little trouble they need to get themselves out of, or have some distressing emotional moments that they have to cope with, right? But we can't put our kids in positions where things could result in death that are careless and callous in the part of parenting, right? And so one of those things is, you brought up sexual abuse, serious physical abuse. Like, we may all have parents who might swat their kid's hand away from something.
Right.
That's not really what I'm talking about, but like leaving bruises, like railing on a kid, we can't have those situations. But Kibby, even then, I'm kind of like, okay, so is there a way that we can stabilize safety and help these kids move forward?
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, between you and me, I may not put my kids in a car with certain family members when they're driving, right? I may not let certain family members be with my kids alone without me being around. Like, I have those
Mhm.
people in my family, right? But if I'm here and I'm watching, I'm around, right? If the harm and the potential for harm or the safety issue is stabilized, then what are we actually cutting off? We're just saying you did that, so you're bad, so you're excommunicated forever. Or, and how do we teach our kids to grow up with someone like that? I mean, how many kids in America right now are growing up with alcoholic parents or grandparents or aunts and uncles who say abusive things and lose their mind and do things that are pretty scary and traumatic? Right? I would say I mean, I don't know the percentages, but I bet it's high, just because I know that alcohol abuse and addiction is high, right? And so we have to be careful. I mean, we can cut people off, but there's not going to be very many people left,
Right. Right.
you know?
I really do love the through line in what you're saying, which is something that I really believe in, is like we need to learn how to cope with hard things. I mean, that is really, I think, what is causing a lot of issues with mental health is like we don't know how to cope with hard things. People are included in that, right? Like someone who, like a grandma who chases you around with a broom. Like how do you cope with that and still be healthy, mentally healthy and resilient? Now I'm gonna shift to the adult, like the parents or grandparents perspective for a minute. How what should they do? How should they heal? It's funny because before I got into this work, I was so much more about like, all parents should validate their kids and, it's not okay. But now that I'm seeing the perspective from the older parents, man, some of these kids, and when I say kids, I mean sometimes 30-year-olds, they're saying awful things to their parents, probably maybe justified, like F you, you're abusive, you should be locked up, you go to hell, like really horrible things. And parents are like, first of all, I don't know what to do. This is so painful to hear, like getting like all these texts about how I'm a terrible mother. Um, but then I don't even know how to heal from this, right? And like as you were saying with the with the Holocaust example, something that popped in my mind was when I lived in Germany, they were really struggling with having to just constantly beat themselves up, right? All Germans, not all
Yeah.
Germans, but there are a lot like, we did wrong. This is terrible. I'm a bad
Really, the
person.
guilt.
We
I've
can't
seen it.
even show our flag, right? So then I'm like thinking like, is that what parents have to do? Like, I'm an abusive person. I can't believe I did that. I'm so sorry. Like, how do we heal here? when
Yeah, no, I
from the
think that's
perspective of the parents?
great. I think that's a great question and an illustration that you gave. So there's a couple of things you said. One is you said maybe it's justified. Um, I don't think that there's anything justifiable about being disparaging, like cursing at people, calling them names, making them, like that's the responsibility for that behavior is on the person who's doing it. Like you can be mad, you can be hurt. And I think this is maybe what you were saying is like, of course, the pain is justified. Of course, we want to validate that emotion, right? Their story. That is not a license to treat people however you want to treat them, right? Like I mean, I would say adult parents should set boundaries on that same behavior. I mean, if somebody is like, I don't remember exactly what you said, but like, you're an abuser, you're a horrible person, fuck you, all this stuff. You can't talk to me like that.
Yeah.
If you want to have a conversation, happy to have a conversation with you. I am not going to talk to you when you're behaving this way. I care too much about you and too much about our relationship.
Mm.
Right? So you're protecting the relationship. You're not pushing that other person away. You're saying, this is just a line. You've crossed a line that I'm not okay with you crossing. Right? If you want to talk about how something I did made you feel, I will listen to that. Right? So that's one piece. There's a difference too between being accountable for behavior and owning up to the fact that I totally agree with you. I am an abusive person. Right? A person and a behavior, those are completely different things, right? If I was reduced to my worst behavior, Kibby, like, I mean, even with, especially toward the people I love the most, even my kids, right? I mean, I remember this, and I'm going to have some shame when I tell this story, honestly. I was very depressed and I was pregnant with my third child, and I had a 2-year-old at home and a 4-year-old at home, and it was bedtime. So you can already imagine the scene because you're a mom. So you know how that happens, right? And I just like lost my mind. And like, I took my son, I grabbed him by the arm. I like literally flung him he had like this mattress on the floor because we had just moved. And I like flung him on the mattress. His head went backwards like that, right? It was awful. And I'm not like, I'm pulling up in tears talking about it. I was like immediately I was like, oh my God, what have I done? And my husband was right there and he watched the whole thing. And I was so like upset and guilt ridden. I'm like, who am I? Like, I'm the most horrible mother. Like, how could I have done that to him? Like, it's, like I reverted to like a really low moment, right? And probably sometimes people say, when you're stressed and you're parenting, you revert back to how you were parenting. So there's a little bit of my history in there, right? But that isn't who I am as a parent. That's not who I am. We don't hit our kids. We don't put our hands on our kids. We don't demean, disparage, call names. Like that is not our value system, right? But I made a mistake and I had to repair that. Like my son needs to understand that no matter how naughty he was being or whatever in that moment, like he's not responsible at all for how I treated him? And so, but that's the thing is like, if we're holding other people to impossible standards, like what's going to happen what are we teaching our kids? And what's going to happen to these same parents when their kids grow up and say, oh, okay, mom, like you actually overindulged my emotions to the point that when I told you I didn't want to go to school because I was being bullied, you said, okay, you don't have to go. So I didn't go to school. So now I don't have an education. So I'm pissed off at you now, right? We can't overcorrect. We can't go from you know, putting our kids continually into the hands of an abusive person or an abusive situation to like protecting them from everything. Like that's not the goal here. And so, I mean, that's just what I would say. I don't even remember your question, but like the point in all of that is like, there's humanity we have to acknowledge here, and we can hold people accountable. We can tell our truth and say, you know what? This is how you made me feel. And I still carry this. And this is a wound. And I know you loved me and you were doing your best. I hear you saying that. I can honor your story too alongside mine, right? That's really the place that we need to be in families.
Yeah.
World.
Yeah. And from the parent side, what should they say? Because what should they say to these kids who are like, you're abusive, I hate you, like, how could you do this to me? You treated me terribly. I love, and I hear the, hey, you can't talk to me like that, right? You can't
Right,
just, you can't just curse at me. You can't just, and then what? How would you say that these boomer parents
right.
should, um, the question I get a lot is, how do I validate those emotions and that pain without saying, yes, I was abusive, or like it's hard because they're like, I intended to, like, help I wasn't abusive. How can I validate that? How can I heal from
Hard, right? I mean, because it sets people up for an impossibility. Like, of course, I don't want to feel like an abusive person.
that?
Do I think the story I just told you about my son and like whipping him onto the bed the way I did, do I think that was an abusive action? Absolutely.
Mhm, mhm,
150%. You can't do that. I mean, it sometimes what makes abuse is also the repetition of it. So that hasn't been my son's
mhm.
experience. The action in of itself is completely unacceptable. Nobody could condone that, right? So that's an uncomfortable setup for a grandparent from the beginning. Like, you have to acknowledge you were an abusive person or I can't move on. Like, I'm not sure who's going to sign up for that, but I'm not,
Right,
right?
right.
I'm sorry. I am hearing that I hurt you in ways that I did not realize I was doing. I never meant to hurt you that way. And I will do things differently, right? I will do what I can to shift, to make this up to you and to show you that I hear how painful that was for you, right? That's what boomer parents or whatever need to do. They can acknowledge and be accountable for an action even if they don't agree on the truth. No one is going to agree on the truth. That is a fallacy, right? Truth is constructed, and we are participants in that. But agreeing on the fact that, like, I have my story that was never my intention, but I hear that I I didn't do it the way I intended to, and I am so sorry that you're suffering from that. But the apology is one part. The other part is like, are you going to keep doing that? You know what I mean? Because you kind of got to stop now, right? If someone's saying you don't listen to me, and you're like, "Oh, I'm sorry about that, but now I'm just going to talk without listening." That's also not an apology. Like, an apology is saying, like, I am going to do it differently and then doing it, but imperfectly, because you're not going to do it perfectly and there's going to be another time when you um don't listen when someone needs you to, because you're human. That's how I know that, right? But really, like, taking those action steps, like accountability and then action, right? Um yeah.
Love that. Anything else you want to say to families? Like, any other burning thoughts or opinions, or you wish people knew?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. First of all, I've loved talking to you. I feel like we could do this for hours. So anytime you want to do this again, I'm totally happy. Um, you know, our human beings are wired for attachment and belonging. And just about the worst thing you can do to a human being is to disconnect them from other human beings. That's why, like, solitary confinement is a thing. You know what I mean? Like, it is a terrible punishment for someone, right? And so I think when we think about families, we have to think about people as whole human beings, not reduced to the pain they caused us or their worst moments or whatever. And we also have to think about the goal being to preserve belonging and connection for all people, because that's the humanitarian thing to do. That's what we all actually want, you know? And so setting boundaries on behavior, yes. Trying again, yes. And in my opinion, and again, this is maybe a bit radical, right? I I don't think there are very many people or situations where cutoff is the actual answer. I think it's about holding love and boundaries together. So, of course, we can push to an extreme and we can find, I'm not saying never should you, there's certain people and certain levels of abuse or whatever that we can't tolerate, right? But I've not met that family, right, in my career. And I deal with families in the most amount of pain, right? So that's the thing that I would say about, to answer your question.
Um, Amy, first of all, I think we should definitely have so many more conversations. I want to hear about, like, high conflict divorce and all that.
Yeah.
But as we wrap up, how can people find you? I'm going to put all these kind of, links
Great.
to find you in the show notes, but what are you doing now? How can people find you? What do you want to tell people about what you're up to?
Great. Yeah. I would love for people to find me. So people can follow me on Instagram. It's at Dr. Amy Todey. And you can you can write it in there so everyone knows how to spell. They also can, I have a really good website where if people are curious about what I'm doing or they have basic questions, or even if they want to see if I'm a good fit for therapy, I'm licensed in most, not California, but most US states because I have an interjurisdictional license to practice. And so I'm happy to see people in my practice as well. And yeah, I mean, my plan is to grow in this way. This is a central part of my professional identity and how I give back to the world. There are so many families are suffering. People can't afford therapists. I am not really doing what I'm doing to become, this isn't a self-focused thing. It is really the way that I'm trying to give back. And so I'm going to develop more social media channels. I'm hoping I'll publish some things moving forward. So yeah, I definitely connect.
Thank you so much. This was
You.
so good. And it's like, I just feel like everything you said, I was like, yes, 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 yes. And it's so
I,
tricky because there's so much pain we're dealing with. And then to, you know, handle that with like compassion and grace and empathy is really, really hard. So I appreciate your perspective. Thank you.
yes, I've appreciated the opportunity of being invited on.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna have you come on again if you're willing.
Okay, great. All
Thank you
right.
so much. And
Thank you,
fellow helpers,
Kibby.
we'll see you next week.
Bye.
By accessing this podcast, you acknowledge that the host of this podcast makes no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information purposes only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast and any and all content or services available on or through this podcast are provided for general, non-commercial, informational purposes only and do not constitute the practice of any medical or any professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment, and should not be considered or used as a substitute for the independent professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment of a duly licensed and qualified healthcare provider. In case of a medical emergency, you should immediately call 911. The host does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast. And information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement. Thank you.